Привет, I'm Chuck Olenek. I'm a Ukrainian-American who was baptized with the name Yaroslav, and that's the name that I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism. And in the society, basically because I grew up, speaking Ukrainian in the house, I focused on things that were Slavic. Well, I didn't just go into the history stuff. I started really researching a lot of the Slavic folklore and mythology because, again, just like with the history, there wasn't much. It was mixed in with Russian stuff and Polish stuff. And going through the mythology, I noticed a bunch of contradictions. And I started really thinking about, well, just how vast the lands of the Slavs were. And definitely how, regionalized they were. Like if you were living in the other valley on the other side of the mountains, we don't like you. So there could be differences that would be forming. Well, I decided that with all this research that I'd done, I needed to do something with it instead of just letting a stack of notebooks this high sit around and get dusty. I thought I would turn these tales of the borderland into videos because videos seem to be easier to digest. And here we are now. This is the 6th installment in my series, Tales of the Borderland. And I'm trying to hit, the mythology. I'm trying to hit the folklore, the legends, all that stuff. Okay. Well, in Old Kiev, when Prince Volodymyr, later Volodymyr the Great, but later Saint Volodymyr, he ends up in 980. He erects these 7 idols up on the top of Old Kiev Hill. And it was like right near his palace. And what I've done so far is I've covered 2 of those main gods, Perun and Veles. Well, now we're getting into following the story of Dazhbog. He was one of the major Slavic gods. His worship was pretty much everywhere in Slavic lands, which, hey, consistency. He is mentioned in the primary chronicle as having his idol put up by Volodymyr. He's mentioned in the tale of Ihor's campaign and in folk songs. His name is even a proper name, right? And the original meaning for Dazhbog would be the giving god or the giver of wealth. And he was often depicted with a sun halo around it. Okay, this is where we start getting into some differences. Some accounts say that his father is Svarog, the divine smith, but then again, who isn't related to Svarog? Svarog is supposed to have been the one who, on his anvil, with the blood of Rod, the creator god, forged all the other gods and goddesses. So yeah, I can see he's, a son of Svarog. And Svarog is believed to have forged the sun and given it to Dazhbog to carry across the sky. Okay, and then there's some other Slavs, like the southern Slavs, they actually tended to worship Dazhbog more than any other god that that Svarog gets pushed out of the way and Dazhbog becomes the main god. Some of the early Serbs believe they were descendants of Dazhbog. In some tales, in some versions, Dazhbog has a brother, Svarozhich, the god of fire, especially the fire that was used to dry the grain after the harvest, and who could foretell the future, and humans were sacrificed to him. Okay, well, Svarozhich is a fire god, but some people believe that Svarozhich is really just another version of Simargl. Some people think that Simargl really is just another version of Dazhbog. It depends on where you go in the Slavic areas. And that Dazhbog is not just a god of the sun, he is also the god of the fire, especially the fire in the hearth. And that it was forbidden to speak loudly or swear or whistle in the presence of the fire, or in the fire, or, well, especially while it's being kindled. I know about this from personal experience because as a tween, I was in the kitchen and I whistled and I felt my dad's hand on the back of my head really hard. You know, like, what did you do that for? And he couldn't really give me an answer except that it wasn't kulturny. It wasn't proper. You know, like, okay. And then when I started doing research, I was like, oh, that custom's buried real deep. Like, my parents aren't really aware of it. Because my mom also hit me when I did that, you know. So it's like, I figured it out after two people hit me and I whistled in the kitchen. You know, it's like, don't ever do that again. Okay, here we go with more inconsistencies. Dazhbog, the sun god, is sometimes married to Misets, the moon, and their kids are the stars. Okay? Sometimes Dazhbog is married to Lada, the goddess of spring, whom he stole from her father, Tsarmora, the sea god. When Dazhbog disappears, that's a cause for dismay. So when you have something like an eclipse take place, or an eclipse basically is a sign that Dazhbog is being devoured by wolves. But there's some versions that say wolves are particularly sacred to Dazhbog, especially a white wolf, and that sometimes Dazhbog will appear someplace as a white wolf or as a man wearing a white wolf skin. So that's kind of confusing. But anyway, these eclipses where Dazhbog disappears, they're taken as warnings of terrible times to come, of plague and famine and war. Dazhbog is born every morning and leaves his palace and travels across the sky, and every evening he dies as a red-faced, bloated old man. And this is where the children of Dazhbog, or Dazhbog's maidens, come in. Zoryi Urtanaya, the Aurora of the Dawn, she's a goddess who is married to Perun in some versions, and she's the personification of the dawn. And as the dutiful daughter of Dazhbog, she opens the gates of her father's palace so he can ride forth and start his daily journey on his diamond chariot drawn by 12 fire-breathing horses with golden manes. And he's attended by Dazhbog's maidens, the planets, and 7 messengers, the comets. As the wife of Perun, Zoryi Urtanaya accompanies her husband into battle. And she's depicted as being fully armed, and she's a courageous warrior, and she's a patron goddess of horses. And amid the fray, she lets down her veil to protect warriors she particularly favors in order to save them from death. There's an invocation or protective charm to gain her favor in battle. O Virgin, unsheathe your father's sacred sword. Take up the breastplate of your ancestors. Take up your powerful helm. Bring forth your steed of black. Fly to the open field, there where the great army with countless weapons is found. O Virgin, cover me with your veil. Protect me against the power of the enemy, against arrows, warriors, and weapons of wood, of bone, of copper, and iron and steel. back to Dazhbog. He's riding across the skies in his diamond chariot with the 12 horses with the golden manes, and he returns to his palace at evening as a bent old man. And now one of the other Zorya, one of his other daughters, Zorya Vecharaya, she basically opens up the gates for dad. He pulls into the palace and she closes the gates, and that means dusk is going to take place. And there's some accounts that say there's only two Zoryi. Some say there's only one, and then the dawn version and the dusk version are just different aspects of the same one. And some say that there are three: a Zorya of midnight, or a goddess of midnight, who doesn't have a name, but Dazhbog dies in her arms and then is restored to life. And she's a goddess of death, rebirth, magic, mysticism, and wisdom. Okay, the Zoryi are also associated with marriage and protection and exorcisms. Okay, together, the three sisters of Dazhbog's maidens, the Zoryi, they're known as protectors of the universe. They're watching over either a doomsday beast or the god Simargl, and I'll have to get to him in a little bit. It was a fire god who's depicted as a dog who's chained to the pole star, or chained to the top of the world tree, and it is their task to watch him and see that he does not break loose, because if he breaks loose, this doomsday beast will devour either Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, okay, or the big bear, the little bear, and that would be the end of creation. So it's their job to make sure that he stays chained up. Okay, in time, Zorya Utranaya, the Aurora of the Dawn, she eclipses her sisters. I guess eclipsed is the right word. And eventually it just becomes Zorya, and that originally meant light, and it later means dawn. She appears in Christianized prayers. Okay, now there's two other sisters that the Zoryi have. Vecharaya's Zvezda, the evening star, and her sister, Zvezda Denica or Danica, the morning star. And they're basically the personification of Venus, as either being seen in the sky before sunrise or after sunset. And together, these two sisters, called the Zvezdi, they have a particular job. Their job is to groom and take care of the white horses that pull Dazhbog's chariot across the sky. All right, as far as what happens to Dazhbog when Volodymyr gets religion, Dazhbog's idol is torn down, and same thing with the other idols, and dragged through the streets and dumped in the Dnipro River, and he gets more and more identified with Lucifer, the bearer of God's light, who fell from the sky to the outer darkness. All right, since I mentioned Simargl, we may as well talk about him. He was one of the 7 gods mentioned in the pantheon in Kiev that was mentioned in the primary chronicle. He was a shapeshifter. He could look either like a young warrior in flames or surrounded by flames, or he could appear as a griffin, a large winged dog, or a lion, and most often he preferred the shape of a dog. With his wings, he's able to fly, and people thought he was really intelligent and really fast. Simargl is a deity that's also mentioned in the sermon by one who loves Christ, as 2 different entities, Sim and Rigel. but the sources don't really indicate any kind of a function for him. Some people think that because his name is similar to an Iranian word or Persian word for a winged dog-headed guardian of plants, that's his function. That he guards a magical tree which contains the seeds of every single plant in existence. We don't really know much about him. Oh, and some accounts say he's the right-hand man of Perun, but then so is Veles. So again, we have some confusion. Anyway, we're going to move past this. I hope to cover a bunch of the goddesses in the next chapter. So I hope you stick with me on my journey.